Howdy everyone, welcome to another episode of Devlogs. We have reached the final lesson of the 201 certification, to which I could not be more excited because after that, we basically enter a new phase in the Devlogs series. You see, up until this point, there's been a process of learning and applying information to things that are all useful for game development. However, this sort of thing isn't what I feel is generally shared in a devlog, that being the learning process. Even though I believe that, my purpose for capturing my learning journey was because it is essential to creating a game. Yet, when you see people post a devlog, you tend to see someone sharing a milestone, followed by minor details encapsulating learning points in their process. This is not a bad thing by any means, however I wanted to try focusing more on the learning process because later on in this series, when I begin showing progress through gameplay features, I want to be able to reference instances of my learning journey that complement the sound side of game development. I may or may not touch base with the programming and art side, though I imagine it'll be a bit more subtle and will give reference to sources that taught me what I've applied. But that's enough of that, because I'll probably reiterate all of that when the transition from lessons to game development actually happens. Let's get started with the final lesson. We have creating a bus structure, volume and metering, using a compressor to control volume, adding reverberation, panning considerations, and side-chaining stingers. We need to use the master mixer hierarchy to make configurations to the bus structure. Even though the music playlist tracks that were composed in a DAW were properly mixed, that balance changes once we begin tying in music with sound effects. Since this is something the composer can't really account for until the audio engineer ties both music and sound effects together, this sort of mixing needs to be done in Wwise. Let me fully expand the contents of the master mixer hierarchy in the Project Explorer, just so you can see what's going on. There are many audio and auxiliary buses in this hierarchy, and by their labels you can get an idea for what each bus is purposed for, but let's clarify what the signal flow is for our audio. For example, if you look at the weapons audio bus, it has three parent objects: the SFX audio bus, the environmental audio bus, and the master audio bus. Now, the master audio bus is the end-all be-all for sound. It is the parent object of all buses, and so if we were to change the volume or effects, any sort of dynamic in the properties of the master audio bus, it would affect everything beneath it. And so the takeaway here is that as we move further and further down in children objects, the purpose of aux and audio buses that have been categorized is to affect a category of sounds that pass through it before reaching the master audio bus. If we begin thinking about how this hierarchy can be useful for our interactive music system, you'll maybe realize we need more buses that account for needed changes in music depending on the flow of gameplay. I will collapse the hierarchy a bit, then create a new audio bus under the master audio bus, naming it music. As a child object to the newly made music audio bus, I will create a child audio bus under it named Wwise 201 Music. This helps to influence a music track specific to a certain level in the Cube game, and also gives us the option to affect all music tracks under the music audio bus, should we decide to change the properties of the parent audio bus and not its children. In the Wwise 201 map we've been playing on, there have been multiple types of playlists that play, and so we'll create child audio buses to the Wwise 201 music audio bus. The names of the audio buses are respective to the music playlist I have been working with. I'm going to assign the music playlists in their property editor to their corresponding audio buses. The stingers will be assigned to the Wwise 201 music bus because they could play over any of these music playlists. Lastly, the synth and sampler objects I created a few episodes ago are in the actor mixer hierarchy and can be assigned to the boss audio bus because that's what they were purposed for. We have a good audio bus structure for our music now, and to see what can be done with this system, we are going to switch to the mixer view in Wwise. I will go to the layouts and click Mixer. we have an empty view where mixing desk sessions appear. I'll create a new one by clicking the 2-arrow icon and selecting New. I name the session Music, then click OK. Similar to the Soundcaster view, we want to drag any objects of interest to display information into the blank view. In this case, I'll drag all of the buses I created by highlighting, then dragging and dropping onto the mixing desk. Headers appear representing each bus, as well as lots of other information. Toward the bottom, if I scroll down, are the voice volume faders. By pulling up the music testing Soundcaster session, we can make connections from information in that view to the information in our newly made mixing session. There is plenty that can be tested when jumping back and forth between a Soundcaster and mixing session. So I played around for a bit, longer than I expected. I was kinda jamming out to the boss playlist near the end there. But you can get an idea for the sorts of testing and volume transitioning and types of information that can be monitored when utilizing a Soundcaster and mixing session simultaneously. Ultimately, this becomes a subjective matter that depends on your ear and leveling skills. It's a fun process. I would just be cautious about hyper-focusing on a piece and warping your perception of the music. Don't forget to take a step back and breathe here and there in order to keep your head clear. One way to further help with understanding the mix of your session is with volume and metering, which I will now set up. First, I'll scroll back to the top of the mixing desk in order to show the meter section. I want all of the buses to have a volume meter, which can all be done at once in the multi-editor. To do so, I'll highlight all of the buses in the Project Explorer, right-click, and select Show in Multi-Editor. In the view that appears, I'll navigate to Audio, Effects, Effect 3, Wise Gain, and Default parentheses Custom. The The gain plugin becomes inserted onto all music buses on the mixing desk, giving us useful visual feedback on our levels. In the meter view to the right under the Master Audio Bus tab, I am going to resize that view and we'll be playing around with it. This meter can be configured with different sync groups. Currently, Sync Group 1 monitors the output of the Master Audio Bus output, which would be all sounds in the game's overall output. However, using a different sync group, we can specifically monitor the output of, let's say, the music bus's output, pertaining to our music tracks and stingers. I'll click the Sync Group button, select Sync Group 2, then drag the music audio bus to the meter. I'm going to change the meter type to RMS, which is a response type setting that can be configured. This basically dictates how a meter that is listening for output responds to levels of energy coming from audio output. Is it immediate? Does it wait a little before reacting? Should it focus on something specific? RMS, root mean square, utilizes an averaging style, which shows the listener the average loudness of something being played back over a short amount of time. Look for what I mean when I select it and play back some music. You may have noticed I was able to switch between meter types and receive different types of information. There are even more types of feedback to explore, though these next methods are a bit wordy and complicated, so give me a second to explain before demonstrating. Some types of feedback I am about to explain are LUFS, LRA, and LU. So unlike the RMS feedback we just saw, which was showing average levels, LUFS, or loudness units full scale, takes into account the human way of hearing and delivers a more considerate feedback toward how humans hear sound. To elaborate, there are frequencies we are more sensitive to than other frequencies, that being high frequencies versus low. LUFS is used a lot in the broadcast television industry in order to account for changes in volume as someone switches channels. This sort of system translates into video games because of the way we transition between different music playlists. In fact, video game companies can request that the track mixes fall within an LUFS level in order to ensure predictability toward the music's balance with sounds as the game updates and updates with new content. This type of loudness meter is available to use in its own unique view. I'm going to click View, Loudness Meter, and Loudness Meter-Sync Group 2. When displayed for the first time, it is by default assigned to the Master Audio Bus, which I will change by dragging the Wwise 201 music bus to the assignment area. I'm going to talk as the music plays and be sure to lower the volume. To the left, you can see two meters colorfully displaying two new types of information: momentary and short-term. Momentary reacts quickly and displays perceived loudness within 0.4 seconds, whereas short-term averages over the last 3 seconds. Over to the right, the integrated meter is not showing anything, which I will change by clicking the Measure button. This button measures perceived loudness over an even longer term and negates any LUFS value below -70, which assures silence will not negatively influence its readings. This meter can give you helpful information, such as what the overall loudness to a music segment is. Now let's say we're trying to get the overall loudness from segment to segment, and so you need for a new average to be calculated when you decide to switch to a new music segment. In that case, all I have to do is click on and off the Measure button, making sure to switch music segments before measuring again. More information is given beneath the integrated meter, where you'll notice a value that is labeled as LRA. This is the loudness range, which calculates perceived loudness change between louder and softer sections of audio. This value is tied to the integrated meter and only becomes useful when you have the measure button clicked for that meter. Next, I will start a capture session by clicking the Start Capture Session button. More visuals for our momentary and short-term values appear on line graphs, updating in real time with our levels. This is all great feedback, but now let's talk about the colors of the meters. The varying colors are blue, yellow, green, and red. Green is known as the target zone, referring to an ideal level of loudness. This target zone can vary depending on the application you are mixing for, and in this case, the target zone matches the standard set by broadcasting on television. However, if we were mixing for web-delivered content, the target zone is known to be around -16 to -18 LUFS instead. The takeaway here is that the target zone is a moving target, pun intended. If a video game company were to have standards over this, it's good to know how to redefine your target zone. I'm going to click the View Settings icon, and in the view that appears, I am first going to change the unity type from LUFS to LU, which means Loudness Unit. This makes it so that when we set a target range, the number doesn't show a weird number like -23, and will instead show 0 as the number we're going for. I don't need to change the other settings, but understand that depending on the expectations set by you or whom you are working for, these other settings for configuring the range may be worth changing. When I close the view, you'll notice that the green target area is now centered around the number 0 on the meters. This is a pretty useful view with important information, and so let's drag this window by its tab into the bottom right corner, beneath the meter view. You may be asked to confirm if you want to change the layout, to which you can just click yes. And now these meters become a part of the mixing view and are displaying all of the handy information we just went over. In terms of predictability, it becomes hard to account for the instances of music and other effects simultaneously playing to cause levels maybe we hadn't experienced in previous simulations. Output could become distorted, sound effects could overpower music, or vice versa. And this is something that, unlike in a DAW, cannot be automated since, during gameplay, there is no timeline to do such a thing on. Since no methods of automating are available when playing a game, we can instead add a dynamic compressor to all audio buses that will constrict our volume changes between louder and softer parts of the music. I am going to double-click the Wwise 201 music channel header in the Mixing Desk view. Its property editor appears and I navigate to the Effects tab. I can add a compressor as one of this audio bus's effects by clicking the double arrow icon and navigating to Wwise Compressor, and I'm going to choose the one named hard_knee_minus_3 decibels_RMS. By default, this compressor is set to subtly reduce levels if the volume gets excessively loud. However, I'm going to change its configurations to make it so it reduces levels to a more sensitive degree. To do this, I will click the Edit button, the 3-dot icon, to the right of the compressor effect that appeared in the first row. The threshold is currently set to -3 decibels, and so any sounds below that level will be unaffected. Rather than explain how the compressor works its magic, I would rather start a capture session, play the music, and then have you listen as I change the slider value for the threshold levels. At the end of messing around with things, I left the compressor's threshold value at -23. Moving on, we are going to be adding reverb to MIDI tracks in Wwise. Reverb tends to be implemented in a DAW while the composer is composing music. However, there may be times where we want reverb to be an on and off thing that can be tweaked during gameplay. By implementing reverb to a musical element within Wwise, it can become a dynamic element that is turned on and off during gameplay or behaves in whatever unique way you can imagine. This is a callback to the synth plugin I used for some imported MIDI tracks, Wwise Synth 1. These sounds were created in Wwise, meaning we can open the properties of these sounds and implement reverb. We had previously done all of that stuff in the episode that covers Lesson 4, so feel free to refresh yourself by going back there. Otherwise, I'm going to be implementing the reverb using an audio bus and giving it a reverb effect. You may be asking, why do we not assign the reverb effect to the object containing the Wwise Synth 1 instrument? And the answer to this falls back on the inheritance system I am pretty sure I explained during the 4th lesson. Remember, the musician's MIDI performance and the way in which they utilized knobs or sliders is inherited into the MIDI tracks in Wwise, and in my past episode, we had taken advantage of this by using an RTPC to manipulate a dynamic I determined in Wwise that was changed by whatever the musician changed with those sliders and knobs while performing. I simply had to map out what slider or knob was tied to the effect I decided to configure. Understanding this, adding a reverb plugin to the parent object would be a huge chunk of processing power. Each MIDI note that plays is an individually generated voice, meaning each would get its own individual reverb. This would get pretty demanding, and that is not even considering if more than one note was playing at a time. So by applying reverb to a bus instead, a single type of reverb will be applied to all of the notes in a music segment instead of individually. The Boss A and C music segments that contain MIDI tracks are not in my Soundcaster, and so I'm just going to use the transport control after selecting those music segments in the Project Explorer. In the master mixer hierarchy, I'm going to create a new child audio bus under the Boss Audio Bus and name it Boss Synths. This can be mapped to those playlists specifically before running through other audio buses and will have our reverb effect. In the Effects tab in the Property Editor for the newly created audio bus, I will click the double arrow icon and navigate to Wwise Matrix Reverb and select medium_room 1. The default wet level of this effect is going to be a bit too subtle, so I'm going to double click its value and set it to -16. Once again, I will use the multi-editor view after selecting the objects in the actor mixer hierarchy that contain our synth objects, arpeggio synth and melody synth. I'll navigate to General Settings, Output Bus, then drag the Boss Synth bus to the assignment area of the Output Bus property. Because our reverberation is an effect used in Wwise, we can tie its properties to an RTPC in a way that complements gameplay. In this case, we'll make it so that the lower the player's health gets, the more reverb that is applied to the mix. I'm going to go to the Wwise 201 Music Audio Bus and in the Effects tab, select the Wwise Matrix Reverb effect and open its editor. Here, I will navigate to the RTPC tab and then set the Y-axis to be the wet levels of the reverb, and the RTPC to be the player health one we've used in a previous episode. The reverb effect will only come into play when the player's health is 15 or lower, and so I'll add points and configure the line so that it declines to 0 by the time the player is above 15 health. As the player goes from 15 to 0, the reverb levels will increase. I can test this in the Soundcaster session and play music while moving the player health RTPC slider. I decided to change the reverb wet levels after listening to the boss music for a bit, and you could definitely tell that there is more surround to the mix as the player's health crawls towards 0. We are now going to move on to panning, and we'll do this for the arpeggio synth. I'm going to double click the arpeggio synth in the Project Explorer, then click the positioning tab in its property editor. I will change the speaker panning to balance-fade, then click the edit button. I will drag the point that determines the pan halfway to the right and at the top of the area. I can also change the X value to 50 when the point is selected, ensuring I am directly at the halfway point. Now I'll play the Boss A and C tracks to hear the change. For the last part of this lesson, we will be talking about side-chaining stingers. This term derives from classic analog audio systems, where an audio signal from one channel is split and fed to another channel as a source signal that can modify the properties of the channel being fed into. This could be done for something such as volume, and though side-chaining doesn't exist in the way I just described, we can achieve the needed effect with an RTPC and some audio bus configurations. Starting with the buses, I will create ones that work with the levels of our stingers. Think of how many sounds could potentially drown out an important stinger, such as a health pickup. If magic, gunfire, enemy noises, and music is playing while the player picks up health, it can be a bit hard to hear with all else going on, and so this system will allow us to change the levels of audio from our music track whenever a stinger is playing, allowing the player to hear important audio cues. Since I am trying to control all of the music tracks, I am going to create a child audio bus to the Wwise 201 music audio bus and name it 201 main. I will then highlight all the music related audio buses and drag them onto the new bus, making them children objects. I will now add an audio bus as a child to the 201 main audio bus, naming it 201 stingers. this will get assigned to the 2 stinger music segments in the interactive music hierarchy. On my mixing desk, I'm going to drag in the 2 new audio buses, 201 main and 201 stingers, and release them between the Wwise 201 music audio bus and the Boss audio bus, causing them to appear in the mixing desk view. For the 201 main audio bus, I will add the Wwise gain plugin, and for the 201 stingers audio bus, I will add the Wwise meter plugin. I will then open the editor view for the meter plugin and play some stingers from the Soundcaster session while observing this meter. I forgot to assign the stinger's audio bus to the segments, but after doing so, you saw the levels for a stinger when they were played during the Soundcaster demonstration. An important takeaway from this is knowing that our Wwise meter effect was set to define (custom) when I selected them, meaning I can make changes to that particular meter effect without it affecting the use of the same effect on other buses. I'm going to click the capture button to start a capture session, and want you to observe the input and output meters while music is playing within the Wwise meter effect editor window. The output and input meters move similarly, though the output meter only has 1 graph whilst the input has 2. This is because of the amount of channels represented by our 201 stinger's audio bus, which is shown through the input meter. The output meter bases its value on the sum of channels from the audio bus and is giving an immediate value in regards to what is playing. However, we can tweak its response time to function like a slew rate and be smoother, which will become useful when we sidechain the bus to affect the main music bus. When I change the release value to 0.5 seconds, causing slight delay in feedback from the output meter. Next, I will change the max value under output gain parameter to 6, which will make it so the output meter's value range matches the input meter's range of -48 to 6. Alright, so the meters now respond to and generate values in the way that we want, meaning it's time to create an RTPC. This will be a new RTPC focusing on the sidechain value. I'm going to click the double arrow icon under Output Gain Parameter and select New. I'll name the new RTPC Stinger_Sidechain and click OK. Once it's created, I'll double click the RTPC to open its property editor, changing the min and max values to match our input and output meters range. I'll then set the default value to -48, since that value represents no stinger being present and is ideal as a starting value. Then we'll click OK. The RTPC can now be attached to the volume property of the Wwise 201 main audio bus. I'm going to click that bus and navigate to the RTPC tab in the property editor. I'll click the double arrow button for the X-axis, choose bus volume, then for the Y-axis, go to Gain Parameters, Music, Stinger_Sidechain. As stinger volume increases, music volume should decrease, and so I'll configure the line so that it lowers the bus's volume as the stinger's volume rises. I'll tell you right now, my adjustments are extreme, and the music will cut out completely when I play a stinger. This is simply proof of concept, but after I demonstrate the effect, we'll change the values to something more subtle and demonstrate a more proper iteration. everybody, was the final part of Lesson 8, and the finale to the Wwise 201 certification. In the next video, I will be sharing exam results and switching focus to my senior project. I most likely will not be doing weekly videos, and instead shifting my priorities toward making good progress on the project itself, my presentation, and other cool projects. So that's it for now. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Have a good one.